There is a fish on the bottom of the Susquehanna River right now, resting in the dark, that weighs more than the child swimming over the top of it. It does not chase, it waits. And over the last 20 years, it has quietly become the single most dominant predator in one of the oldest rivers in America. A river that runs past the state capitol, under interstate bridges, along backyards and boat launches and swimming holes. And almost no one who fishes it, or floats it, or lives beside it, knows the thing is down there at all. Here's the part that should not be possible. Nobody smuggled it in. Somewhere upstream of all of it, people put its kind into these waters on purpose, and they were certain, on paper, in writing, that it could never spread. They were wrong in a way no one has since figured out how to undo. Ask a biologist today whether it can be removed, and you will not get a maybe, you will get a flat no. So the giant catfish are not coming to take over Pennsylvania's rivers. They already have. What nobody can answer is how a fish that nobody wanted became the one thing nothing can stop, and how much farther north it still intends to go. Start with the one everyone catches. The flathead catfish. It belongs to the Mississippi River Basin. That is its home water, 1,000 miles and more to the west and south. The muddy channels of the Ohio and the Missouri and the great river they both feed. It has no natural business in the Susquehanna. For most of the history of that river, it simply was not there. Then, around the year 2002, United States Geological Survey records catch the first confirmed flatheads in the Susquehanna in Pennsylvania. Downstream, in the Schuylkill near Philadelphia, they had already turned up years before that. Nobody watched them arrive. There was no flood, no accident anyone could point to. The most likely story, the one researchers at Penn State keep returning to, is the plainest and the most human. Someone moved them, an angler or a handful of anglers who liked catching big flatheads somewhere else and decided the Susquehanna could use a few. A bucket, a boat ramp, a quiet favor to a river that never asked for it. To understand what the Susquehanna was up against, you have to understand what a flathead actually is, because it is not the catfish most people picture. It is not a whiskered bottom feeder nosing through the silt for scraps. It is a hunter. It has a wide, flat shovel of a head, a lower jaw that juts out past the upper, and a mouth built to inhale a living fish whole. It hunts at night. It holds motionless in the deep holes and the sunken log jams and the shadows under the banks. And it does not go looking for food so much as it waits for food to swim close enough. That is why the men chasing the big ones bait their hooks with live bluegill and live trout. A flathead wants its prey alive. It wants it moving. And once a fish like that decides your river is home, it can spend the next 20 or 30 years doing almost nothing but eating and growing, because a flathead never really stops growing. 20 years later, the accounting is done, and it is not close. Flatheads are now the apex predator of the Susquehanna. Researchers from Penn State, the U.S. Geological Survey, and the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission spent 2 years pulling them out to see what they had been eating. 576 fish, 241 of them with something still in the stomach. And the list of what was in there reads like an inventory of the river itself. Channel catfish, minnows, crayfish, including the invasive rusty crayfish that had already been shoving the native ones aside, one invader feeding on another. And in the biggest flatheads, the ones past 2 feet long, the smallmouth bass. The fish that a whole generation of Pennsylvania anglers drives hours to catch, the pride of the river going down whole in the dark. Then, in 2025, a second team went further and asked a harder question. Not just what the flatheads were eating, but what they were doing to the river as a machine. Working through the Ecological Society of America, they compared stretches of the Susquehanna where the flatheads had taken hold against stretches where they had not, and they traced the way energy moves through the whole system, from the crayfish and the minnows all the way up to the top. What they found is that the flathead does not simply thin out the native fish. It rewires the river. It slots itself in at the very top of the food web, above the channel catfish and the smallmouth that used to hold that spot, and it changes the way energy flows through every level beneath it. The Susquehanna is not just losing fish. It is being rebuilt, quietly, around a predator that was not there when anyone alive first learned to swim in it. And these fish get big. Not big for a river fish. Big by any measure a person can actually picture. The state record flathead in Pennsylvania in 2006 weighed 48 pounds, 6 ounces. That felt like a ceiling. It was not. In 2019, the record went to 50 pounds, 7 ounces out of the Susquehanna. The next year, 2020, a fish from the Schuylkill in the middle of Philadelphia broke it again at 56 pounds, 3 ounces. Then, in May of 2023, on a stretch of the Susquehanna called Lake Aldred, a man named Michael Worley set a live rainbow trout on a hook, dropped it into a channel 50 feet deep, and pulled up a flathead that weighed 66 pounds, 6 ounces, over 4 feet long, a girth of 35 inches. He fought it for half an hour and his arms cramped, and when it was weighed and measured, he put it back in the river alive, because that is the law, and it swam away. 66 pounds. In under 20 years, in a river where the fish did not exist, the record climbed by 18 pounds. And the 30 and 40 pounders stopped being the story. They became the ordinary catch. On a good night below the dams, an angler can lose count. Here's the part that should sit with you if you love that river. 66 pounds is not the ceiling. It is barely halfway. The largest flathead catfish ever caught on rod and reel came out of a reservoir in Kansas in 1998, and it weighed 123 pounds, over 5 feet long. When biologists finally got the chance to study it, they concluded it was at least 22 years old, that it had grown fast, and that it had recently swallowed another large fish nearly whole. That is what a flathead can become when it has time and food. The Susquehanna fish have only had about 20 years. By the standards of their own species, they are still young, which means the biggest catfish that river will ever hold has almost certainly not been caught yet. It is out there right now in the dark, still growing. Now hold on to one thing, because it is about to matter. The flathead is the invader everyone can see. It is the one in the phone photos, the one in the record books, the one the local paper writes up. It is the loud one. The one that may actually change everything about these rivers is a fish almost nobody in Pennsylvania has caught yet. Its name is the blue catfish. And to understand why it is coming, you have to drive south to Virginia and go back to the year 1974. The blue catfish is the largest catfish in North America. Most of the adults run around 30 pounds, but they do not stop there. They can pass 100 pounds. The tidal record in Virginia is 102. They live 20, 30 years. They eat almost anything, and I mean that with no exaggeration, because biologists cutting them open have found fish, and clams, and crayfish, and also chicken bones and pieces of trash. They are the closest thing a river has to a garbage disposal with a spine. And if you want to know what a river looks like after the blue catfish have fully moved in, you do not have to guess. You can look at the Chesapeake Bay, 300 miles south, where they have had 50 years to finish the job. In parts of Virginia's James, Rappahannock, and York rivers, the blue catfish now make up as much as 70 to 75% of every pound of fish in the water. Not 75% of the catfish. 75% of everything that swims. An adult blue catfish eats around 8 or 9% of its own body weight every single day. And it does not feed politely along the bottom the way the old myth says. It hunts through the entire water column, top to bottom. And the researchers cutting them open have found the proof, and it reads like something out of a fever dream. A 47-pound catfish with a full-grown wood duck inside it. A 30-inch catfish with a 19-inch striped bass folded into its stomach. Turtles. Muskrats. Their own young. There is almost nothing in a river a big blue catfish will not eat, and there is almost nothing big enough to eat a big blue catfish back. The scale of it is hard to hold in your head. In the tidal James River alone, one group of researchers estimated that in a single year the blue catfish ate more than 900 tons of shad and their relatives, and around 440 tons of blue crab. 440 tons of crab out of one river in 1 year, which by their own math worked out to roughly 5% of the entire commercial crab catch of Virginia, gone down the throats of a fish nobody ever wanted in that water. The alarm has climbed all the way up to the governors. In late 2025, the governor of Maryland formally asked the federal government to declare the blue catfish a fisheries disaster. The same kind of declaration a state files after a hurricane. The request was turned down. The fish kept eating. This is the animal that is now swimming up the Delaware. Not a possibility. Not a projection. The exact same fish. Doing the exact same thing. Moving north into rivers that have never seen it. Which raises the question the whole story turns on. If this fish is that destructive, and people put it in the water on purpose, why did nobody stop it 50 years ago? The answer is that everyone was certain they did not have to. In the 1970s, the striped bass fishery in the Chesapeake was collapsing, and Virginia's fisheries managers wanted to give anglers something else to chase. So they made a decision that seemed reasonable at the time. The kind of decision everybody was making then. They stocked blue catfish. Beginning around 1974 and continuing into the mid-80s, the state released these fish into 3 tributaries of the Chesapeake: the James, the Rappahannock, the York. By the records of the program, roughly 300,000 of them, and here's the belief that made it feel safe. Here's the explanation that would hold for the better part of 40 years. Blue catfish are freshwater fish. Everyone knew that. The Chesapeake is a brackish estuary, salt water bleeding up from the sea, and the reasoning was simple and confident. The catfish would stay in the fresh rivers where they had been put, because they could never survive the salt in between. The rivers were fences. The bay was a moat, the fish were trophies in a box. For a long time, that story looked true. If you want to know how a fish that was supposed to be trapped in 3 southern rivers ended up under the bridges of Philadelphia, and why no one saw it coming, stay with me. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, consider subscribing while you're here. This channel goes looking for exactly these things. The wild lives hiding inside the places that look tame, and there is always another one on the way. Because the story was wrong, it turned out the blue catfish never read the memo about the salt. They tolerate fresh water, and they tolerate brackish water, up to a level nearly half as salty as the open sea. And in wet years, when the rivers run high and push the salt back down, they tolerate even more. And they move. The bay was never a moat, it was a highway. Over the following decades, the blue catfish spread out of those 3 Virginia rivers into nearly every major tributary of the Chesapeake. Then they kept going. At the very top of the bay, there is a shipping channel, the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal, a man-made cut that joins the Chesapeake to the Delaware River. The fish found it. And about a decade ago, a fisherman on the Christina River, inside the Delaware watershed, pulled up a catfish that did not look like anything that belonged there. He took a photograph and sent it to the state. It was a blue catfish. The first one ever recorded in that watershed. For 5 years, nothing else turned up, and people let themselves believe it was a fluke. It was not a fluke. It was a scout. Now, the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission is doing something it does not do lightly. It is telling anglers on the lower Delaware to kill blue catfish on site, to photograph them, report them, and never put them back. In the fall of 2023, the commission put out a formal alert. Blue catfish were showing up in growing numbers in the lower Delaware, around the Commodore Barry Bridge, and in the lower Schuylkill right inside the city of Philadelphia, and in a stretch of Bucks County water called the Upperback Eddy. The same fish Virginia put in the water 50 years ago, the fish that was never, ever supposed to leave 3 southern rivers, is now swimming under the bridges of Philadelphia. And the scientists watching it come are not calm. Mary Fabrizio, a researcher at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science who has tracked these fish for years, was asked point blank whether the blue catfish could ever be eradicated. She did not hesitate. Not possible, she said. There's not enough money, not enough people, not enough time. And with the water warming, she added, the fish are pushing north. They are already in Delaware Bay. Sit with what that means for a second. The rivers this story started with, the Susquehanna and the Delaware and the Schuylkill that ties into both, are not the safe interior of catfish country. They are the front line. They are the leading edge of an invasion that began in Virginia and has never once been turned back. And here's what makes the timing so cruel. The catfish are not moving into a crowded, healthy river with fish to spare. They are moving into water that people have spent 100 years trying to bring back from the edge. Once, The Susquehanna and the Delaware ran silver every spring with American shad, migrating up out of the ocean by the millions to spawn in the water where they were born. Then came the dams, and the pollution, and the overfishing, and the great runs collapsed. For decades since, agencies have been fighting to undo that damage, building fish passages, trucking shad upstream by hand, counting them one at a time, clawing the runs back inch by inch. The blue catfish eats shad. Shad is one of its favorite foods. And then there is the oldest thing in the river, the Atlantic sturgeon, a creature so ancient it looks assembled out of armor plate, a fish whose kind has swum these coasts since the age of the dinosaurs, that can live 60 years, grow to 14 feet, and weigh 800 pounds. In the 1880s, the Delaware held the largest spawning population of Atlantic sturgeon on the entire East Coast, so many that there was a caviar rush, with nearly 3,000 tons of them hauled out in a single year. Then people ate the fishery down to nothing. Today, the Atlantic sturgeon is listed as endangered, and by one recent count, fewer than 300 spawning adults are left in the whole Delaware River, perhaps fewer than 250. Their eggs can only survive in clean, fresh water on the bottom in the deep channels, which is exactly where a blue catfish waits. The researchers have said out loud what they are afraid of. They are afraid the blue catfish are eating young sturgeon. Nobody has proven it yet. One study of catfish stomachs in a nearby river turned up no sturgeon at all, and that is real. And it is good news as far as it goes. But it settles nothing, because there are millions of catfish and only a few hundred sturgeon, and it would take almost nothing to tip a fish that is already this close to gone. That is the whole quiet horror of it. We would not see it happening. We would only find out afterward from the counting, when the number that was 250 became a number lower than that, and then lower again. So when anglers and agencies say nothing can stop them, they are not being dramatic. They are being precise. And it is worth understanding exactly what that phrase means, because it does not mean one thing. It means three. And none of them is comfortable. The first is the hardest to accept. You cannot fish them out. A task force that spent more than a year studying the blue catfish in the Chesapeake concluded that eradicating an invasive species is rarely even feasible once it is spread through an open body of water like the bay. And the numbers underneath that conclusion are staggering. By the estimate of the researchers studying it, just to hold the Chesapeake population steady, not shrink it, hold it flat, commercial fishermen would have to pull between 15 and 30 million pounds of catfish out of the water every single year. To actually reduce it would take far more. There is no army of anglers that size. There never will be. And even in the rivers where the explosion has finally slowed, where biologists say the population is settling into a kind of grim equilibrium that is not recovery, it only means the catfish have eaten their way to a stable dominance. The famous James River still gives up giant fish, but fewer of the true monsters than it did 20 years ago, because the prey that built them has thinned. The catfish did not leave. The river simply reorganized itself around them and stayed that way. The second possibility is the one that sounds like a solution and is really a surrender. If you cannot remove them, you eat them. Virginia and Maryland have both leaned hard into this, marketing wild-caught blue catfish to restaurants and shoppers, standing up a commercial fishery, running programs with hopeful names about bringing the river to the table. And it works. A little. It takes fish out, but think about what it actually requires. To keep the pressure on the invader, you have to build an industry that depends on the invader. You have to want the catfish to keep existing in numbers forever, so that people keep catching them and eating them and making a living off them. The plan to control the fish only works if the fish never really leaves. That is not victory. That is a treaty with the thing you were trying to defeat. The third possibility is the coldest, and it has nothing to do with us at all. The water is getting warmer. Blue catfish are creatures of warm southern rivers, and every year the line where they can comfortably live creeps a little farther up the coast. The scientists tracking them have stopped asking whether the fish will keep moving north. They ask how far and how fast. The Chesapeake and Delaware Canal is not going to be undug. The climate is not going to cool back down on any schedule that helps the sturgeon. The corridor is open, and it stays open, and the fish keep coming through it. The Delaware is not the end of the map for these animals. It may just be the middle of it. And underneath all three of those, There's a layer of things nobody knows yet, and that is its own kind of unsettling. Nobody can tell you how far up the Susquehanna the flatheads will finally push, or what happens to the smallmouth bass fishery Pennsylvania is genuinely famous for, the one that draws anglers from other states and puts money into small river towns. Once that fish is a routine meal for a 60-pound ambush predator that did not exist in the river a lifetime ago. Nobody can tell you what the shad runs do when the thing eating them arrives on top of a century of dams and restoration work. And nobody can tell you truly how many of these catfish are down there right now. You cannot count what you cannot see, and the whole terrible talent of a catfish is that it is not seen. It sits on the bottom, in the deep channels, under the bridges, in the slow green water below the dams. It does not surface. It does not announce itself. It waits. If you fish these rivers or you live along them, you already know things the studies are still catching up to. Anglers on the Delaware have been saying for years now that the flatheads are everywhere and the bluegills and the perch are thinning out. So tell me where you are watching from. And if you have ever pulled something out of your local water that had no business being that big, put it in the comments. The people studying this are, in part, listening to you. Here's what this is really about, in the end. Not the size of the fish, not the teeth, not fear. It is about the gap between how a place looks and what it holds. You can stand on a bridge over the Susquehanna on a summer evening, and the water is calm and brown and ordinary. And there are children swimming and somebody grilling on a dock, and it looks like the safest, tamest, most settled river in the world. It looks like nothing at all is happening. And the entire time, 20 feet down in the dark, the biggest predator that river has ever held is lying perfectly still, breathing slow, waiting for the light to go. The flathead is down there below Safe Harbor Dam, 4 feet of muscle and 50 feet of water. The blue catfish is moving up the Delaware right now past Philadelphia. Heavier every year, patient in a way we are not built to understand. And the Atlantic sturgeon, the ancient one, the survivor of everything, is still holding on in the deep channels below them, laying its eggs on the same river bottom where the newcomers hunt, running out of time and water it has owned since before there were roads to name. They were put here, or they came here, and they were never once asked to stay out of sight, and they will not. We could learn to see them. We would only have to change how we live beside the water to do it. Until then, the rivers look exactly the way they always have. Calm, familiar, safe. And down in the dark, the giants are still there, and they are still growing, and they are still waiting. If this is the kind of thing you had no idea was happening right underneath you, YouTube thinks you are going to want the one already waiting on your screen. Go ahead. It is down there too.